Week 13 of the fantasy football season. Here's the top 36 running backs I'm ranking this week. Number 1, Saquon Barkley of the Philadelphia Eagles. What a season it's been for him in his first year with Philadelphia. And obviously, he's an MVP candidate, is Saquon Barkley. So last week, over 300 total yards, found the end zone twice. This week, I know not the greatest of matchups, but it doesn't matter the matchup. Barkley's gone out there weekly, put up monster fantasy points, and this week at Baltimore in a potential high-scoring ball game. I have him as the top option. Number 2, staying in the same game, Derrick Henry of the Baltimore Ravens. It's either a touchdown weekly and a solid performance overall, or over 100 yards. So last week, 140 yards on the ground versus a good Charger defense. This week, like I said, potential high-scoring game versus the Philadelphia Eagles coming to town. And Derrick Henry's been matchup-proof. He's been a monster all season long, 13 touchdowns on the ground. And once again this week, I think he goes out there and has a dominant performance. Number 3, Joe Mixon of the Houston Texans. So last week, it was a down game for Mixon and this Texan team, obviously losing an upset ball game versus division rival, the Tennessee Titans. So Mixon, he didn't do much in that one. But this week, I think Houston and Joe Mixon takes advantage of a great matchup with the Jacksonville Jaguars that have been torched all season long on the ground, through the air, no matter what. And Mixon, it's rare to see him have 2 bad games in a row, especially this season. So I think this week, in a good matchup, and this Texan team with a chip on their shoulder goes out there and has a good ball game. Number 4, Devon Achane of the Miami Dolphins. If Tua didn't miss about 6 weeks of the season, I think Achane right now might be the number 1 running back in all fantasy football. He's that talented. He could do it all, running between the tackles, home run ability, catch the football out of the backfield. And last week, he found the end zone 2 more times. And this week, I think it's going to be a grinded out game Thanksgiving night at the Green Bay Packers, where they're going to rely on Achane heavily, and this one is Miami. And I think he goes out there and produces again. Number 5, Alvin Kamara of the New Orleans Saints. Alvin Kamara, what a season it's been for him. He's the number 1 option easily in this offense for the Saints. And this week back home in the fast track versus the Rams, a defense that really hasn't been great all season long. I think Alvin Kamara is going to have his way with this defense, a little refreshed as well coming off the bye week. And like I said, this offense just runs through him. Number 6, Jahmyr Gibbs of the Detroit Lions. So we know David Montgomery, he's banged up. He might not be 100%. Jahmyr Gibbs, what a season it's been for him once again in his second season. One of the best running backs in all pro football, could do it all, catch the football out of the backfield, home run ability, running between the tackles. And this week in a good matchup versus the Chicago Bears, where they've stopped no one over the last month of the season. I think Gibbs once again has a good ball game. Number 7, Christian McCaffrey of the San Francisco 49ers. I know last week CMC, he was shut down, and this offense had trouble moving the football at the Green Bay Packers with Allen in their quarterback. But I believe Brock Purdy's going to give it a go. He's been throwing the football around so far early on in the week in practices. And Christian McCaffrey, it's tough to bottle up a running back like this 2 weeks in a row. I know it's a pretty good defense they're going to Buffalo on Sunday night, but this is pretty much a must-win game, and I think they rely heavily on McCaffrey. If it's Purdy or Allen, whoever it is at quarterback, and he's going to work his way into volume and points. Number 8, Josh Jacobs of the Green Bay Packers. Last week, a monster game for Jacobs, over 120 yards on the ground, 3 touchdowns in that one, and the offense ran through him. So I thought he was a decent signing in the offseason, but now if they're going to go through Jacobs more, is this Packer offense. We know Josh Jacobs, he's been getting a lot of work all season long, 22, 28 touches per game most games. This week, a decent matchup with the Dolphins coming to town, where this could be a potential high-scoring game between these 2 teams. And like I said, Josh Jacobs, he's been a good back, and he's worked his way into points all season long. But last week had the breakout and monster ball game. Number 9, Bijan Robinson of the Atlanta Falcons. So what a nice second season it's been for Bijan, and that's what happens when you play with a solid quarterback. Last season it was Desmond Ridder and Taylor Heineke as the quarterbacks for this Atlanta Falcon team, but this season with Kirk Cousins, it's opened everything up. This offensive line already last year was one of the best units in the league, and now to have Kirk Cousins there, like I said, teams aren't going to load the box, and Bijan, he can catch the football out of the backfield. He can run in between the tackles. And this week's a decent matchup. We just saw the last couple weeks, Chase Brown and Derrick Henry have big games versus Charger defense. Number 10, Breece Hall of the New York Jets. Breece Hall, we know he was a top 4, top 5 pick overall, second running back or third back off the board in fantasy drafts this season. And for the most part this year, I thought Breece Hall's been pretty decent. I know some games he's had under double-digit fantasy points, but then you're getting those big games like we saw a couple weeks ago versus the Indianapolis Colts. So this week versus Seattle defense, I know last week shut down Arizona, but this defense has to travel to New York in this ball game, and I think Breece Hall goes out there, has another solid performance. Number 11, Kenneth Walker of the Seattle Seahawks staying in the same game. So Kenneth Walker, it's been a great season for him, no doubt about it. I thought coming into the year, Charbonnet would eat into the workload a little bit. And Charbonnet early in the season got a few starts when Walker was out. But once Walker came back on that Monday night game in Week 4 at the Lions and had 3 touchdowns, he stamped that he was the running back in the backfield for Seattle, and he's taken off ever since. And weekly, he's been a top 12 option. So this week, middle of the pack matchup with the New York Jets, but I believe Kenneth Walker is starting to become one of those running backs that is matchup proof, and he's just a top option. Number 12, Kyren Williams of the Los Angeles Rams. His numbers are definitely taking a hit. I've spoken about that over the last couple weeks, but rightfully so, with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua back in the starting lineup for this Ram team. Someone's numbers are going to go down, and unfortunately, it was Kyren Williams over the last few weeks. I know Kyren Williams last season, he overcame that. Cooper Kupp missed some time, but this week in a good matchup in New Orleans, fast track. And it's not like Kyren Williams' yards per carry or anything are going down. It's just limited touches, it seems like. And there was a lot of ball games of late where they were trailing and have to throw the football a whole lot. But this week in New Orleans, if it's a tight ball game, I think Kyren's going to get a decent workload and bounce back this week. 13, Chase Brown of the Cincinnati Bengals. So Chase Brown, he's been solid all season long for this Bengal team. And obviously the last couple weeks, he stepped into the full workload with Zach Moss out for the remainder of the regular season with a neck injury. So this week, I know it's a grinded out, tough matchup versus the Pittsburgh Steelers, but we did see Nick Chubb last week find the end zone twice and have 18 fantasy points in PPR leagues. But Brown, one of the best receiving backs, in my opinion, out of the backfield. And this week versus Pittsburgh, in a high-powered offense that this Bengal team is, he's going to get his points. Number 14, James Cook of the Buffalo Bills. So James Cook, he's been a solid back all season long and one of the best offenses in the league. And I know on paper it's not a great matchup, but to be honest, this San Francisco 49er defense really hasn't stopped anyone. And like I mentioned earlier in the video, Josh Jacobs last week went out there and he ran all over this defense. So James Cook coming off the bye. Anytime you come off the bye, your body's a little bit refreshed, you play a little looser. And I think this week on Sunday night versus Niner defense, he goes out there, has a good game. 15, Aaron Jones of the Minnesota Vikings. Last week, a big workload, big ball game, over 120 yards on the ground for Aaron Jones. And this week, a pretty good matchup versus the Cardinals coming to town. So they had a long road trip with this Minnesota Viking team. And now back home on the fast track. And Aaron Jones, the only problem with him throughout his career has been health. But so far this season, he's been pretty healthy. And he's been a top 15 option weekly. 16, Jonathan Taylor of the Indianapolis Colts. So Jonathan Taylor, his numbers have definitely taken a hit over the last couple weeks with Anthony Richardson back in the lineup, where teams pretty much are loading the box and they're forcing Richardson to beat them. And we know Richardson's going to take some running away as well from Jonathan Taylor. So Taylor's still a talented back, no doubt about it. This week I like the matchup at the Patriots, but I just believe with Richardson in there, his ceiling is low, and most likely with Josh Downs out as well, that's going to be a problem, I believe, for this offense, where, like I said, New England, they're going to sell out on the run and force Richardson to try to beat him. 17, Chuba Hubbard of the Carolina Panthers. It's been a great season. He got the contract extension, is Chuba Hubbard. And this week, another good matchup versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, where their defense pretty much the whole season has trouble stopping running backs. Besides last week, they did a good job at the New York Giants. So Hubbard got the extension, playing good football. Jonathan Brooks, not a threat to his job, obviously, returning last week. And this week, I think he goes out there and he's a solid RB2 for fantasy owners. Night 18, David Montgomery of the Detroit Lions. We know he left last week's game with the shoulder injury, and he watched the rest of it on the sidelines. But he's a tough player. I believe he's going to play in this ball game versus the Chicago Bears, his former team. And you know when you verse your former team, the juices are flowing. So I think Montgomery, he's fine. He's going to go out there. He's been limited in practice the last day now. And he's been that goal line back and that physical in between the tackle guy, with Gibbs being the home run hitter and a third down catching downs back. So it's the best backfield in the league, I believe. And Montgomery, once again, will go out there and take care of business. Number 19, Tony Pollard of the Tennessee Titans. A great signing this season for this Titan team, no doubt about it, with Tony Pollard. Him and Calvin Ridley, top two options on this offense. And this Commander defense, they've been leaky over the last few weeks. We saw a depleted Dallas Cowboy team go in there and put up 34 points, even though I know the special teams helped them big time. But Tony Pollard last week, a big game. And once again, I think he goes out there at the Commanders and has a solid performance, a team he's obviously been familiar with throughout his career, with his whole career besides this year with the Cowboys. 20, Bucky Irving of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Bucky Irving, it's been a great season for him in his rookie year. Him and Rachaad White, one of the best 1-2 combo backfields in the league. And he's more in between the tackles and the goal line type of back for the most part for Tampa Bay. So this week in a great matchup at the Panthers that can't stop anyone. I think Bucky Irvin goes out there even in 12, 15 touches and has a solid performance. 21 J.K. Dobbins of the Los Angeles Chargers. I don't know if J.K. Dobbins is going to play in this ball game, obviously, for the Chargers. He was banged up, left in the second quarter with a knee injury and never returned last week on Monday night versus the Ravens. Quick turnaround. And this week at the Atlanta Falcons, if he does play, it's a solid matchup. And J.K. Dobbins, all season long, he's been pretty solid. But obviously, this is the problem you run into with Dobbins, his injuries throughout his career, coming off an ACL and coming off an Achilles over the last couple seasons. So this week, hopefully, he gives it a go. And if he does, I believe he's a solid option as a number 2 back for owners. 22, DeAndre Swift of the Chicago Bears. So DeAndre Swift, it's been a solid year for him. I know the last couple weeks the numbers have dropped off. And this Bear offense, they've been inconsistent all season long, and that's what happens when you have a rookie quarterback. Some weeks you're going to put up weeks, and some weeks you're not going to do much. But this week in a matchup, one of his former teams in the Detroit Lions, I think DeAndre Swift is going to go out there and he's going to make plays. The only threat to him is Roschon Johnson, but he pretty much has been only the goal line back, where Swift's pretty much been 80 to 85% of the touches in that backfield. 23, James Conner of the Arizona Cardinals. So James Conner last week, it was a down week for him, no doubt about it. But all season long, for the most part, he's been a solid running back. I know this week it's a tough matchup at the Minnesota Vikings, where they've been solid all year long versus the run. I know last week they had a hiccup, blown a 24-10 lead versus the Chicago Bears. But James Conner in this offense, they got to go back to the basics. Where last week they lost 16-6, but they gave up on the run early in offense. I think this week they're going to focus on the run more, is Arizona, then work off the play action and open up the offense. So this week in Minnesota, even in a tough matchup, I think Conner, he's a nice number 2 back for owners. 24, Rachaad White of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Rachaad White, the last few weeks, he's definitely getting things going. And we know even from last season, Rachaad White, one of the best receiving backs in all pro football. So this week with a great matchup at the Carolina Panthers, I think Rachaad White, he's going to make some plays in this one. The only thing, obviously, he's not great in between the tackles, and Bucky Irvin's been vulturing some goal line touches as well. 25, Isaiah Pacheco of the Kansas City Chiefs. I thought Pacheco was going to return last week, but obviously it makes more sense for him to return to the lineup this week for this Kansas City Chiefs team is Isaiah Pacheco. So he's a solid running back when healthy. Last couple years he's been solid for this Chiefs team, and I think it's a good game for him to ease himself back versus Vegas Raider team. Obviously on Black Friday, the second Black Friday game of all time. So Pacheco, I believe, will get 60-65% of the touches with Kareem Hunt mixed in as well. And it's a good game for him to ease back in and get going. And he had the extra 4 or 5 days of rest as well, where last week was the target for him to come back. 26, Brian Robinson of the Washington Commanders. I know Robinson's been banged up over the last few weeks here. Last week he left the game versus the Dallas Cowboys, but I believe this week he's going to give it a go versus the Tennessee Titans. And this Washington Commander team, they've lost a few games in a row now where they were looking good. Philadelphia beat them. Dallas Cowboys went in there and beat them. And this week it's a must-win game, I believe, if they want to keep their good playoff chances alive versus Tennessee. So Tennessee, we know their defense can't stop anyone. I know Joe Mixon didn't have a great game last week, but besides that, running backs have had field days all season long versus defense. 27, Najee Harris of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And Najee Harris, it's been an up-and-down season once again for Harris. Obviously, this offense, they played more like a traditional offense with Russell Wilson in there over the last month of the year. So this week, a good matchup, though, at the Cincinnati Bengals, a defense that can't stop anyone all season long, giving up over 30 points on the end the majority of the ball games. And this week, I think Harris goes out there, has a bounce-back performance. 28, Ramondre Stevenson of the New England Patriots. So Ramondre Stevenson has been an up-and-down back all season long for this Patriot team. Some weeks we've seen the 20-point games, and then some weeks you're only going to get 6-7 points out of them. So this week versus the Colt defense, I know that's not that great, especially versus the run this season, but I just believe the ceiling isn't that high for Stevenson, and he's not even catching the football a lot out of the backfield as well. So on an offense where it's one of the worst offenses in the league and the ceiling isn't high, where he's not a big explosive running back, where he's more physical and between the tackles, if he's not getting the touchdowns, Stevenson, his numbers haven't been great. So this week, he's a back-end 2 option for fantasy owners with a full slate. 29, Tyrone Tracy of the New York Giants. Singletary got the touchdown last week. The fumble issues have definitely been a problem, obviously, for the rookie Tyrone Tracy this season. But I believe he's a solid running back. And next year, if they could get a good quarterback in there, is this New York Giant team. Either Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward or something in free agency. I think this whole offense could open up. But this week at the Dallas Cowboys, where their defense hasn't been great, I think Tracy could be a decent flex option or back in RB2, 30 Nick Chubb. The Cleveland Browns and Nick Chubb last week, his best game since he returned off the injured list, where he missed majority of the season with a devastating knee injury from last season, tearing it early in the year. But this week, a tough matchup at the Denver Broncos, and one of the best defenses in all pro football, and arguably they could be the best defense in pro football, even though last week they did give up 19 points to the Vegas Raiders. But this week, I think the game script's going to play into the Broncos' hands. And Nick Chubb, just like Ramondre Stevenson, if he's not scoring touchdowns, his ceiling's low. The receiving back at all out of the backfield. Jerome Ford's got that role. And we've seen it throughout Nick Chubb's career, where he barely catches any balls per season. So this week at Denver, he's a back-end option as well. 31 Kareem Hunt of the Kansas City Chiefs. So Kareem Hunt's definitely filled in well this season for Pacheco, who missed 2 months of the year, but now he's going to return in this game. But I still believe Hunt's going to get 35-40% touches, and we saw it over the last few seasons with the Browns, where Kareem Hunt will vulture some touchdowns. He'll be a passing downs back at time as well, and he fits this Kansas City offense good. So this week with a good matchup versus the Raiders, and even if his touches are going to be cut in half, I still believe Hunt could go out there and be productive for fantasy owners. 32 Rico Dowdle of the Dallas Cowboys. So believe it or not, Rico Dowdle, he's had the majority of his games double-digit fantasy days in PPR leagues. So this week with a decent matchup with the New York Giants coming to town, where we saw Rashad White, Bucky Irvin last week have good ball games versus defense. I think Rico Dowdle as a flex-type option or in deeper leagues, a running back too, can help. But he's another guy where his ceiling isn't high, and he's just on an offense that just isn't that good as well. 33 Amir Abdullah, a Las Vegas Raiders. Abdullah last week, he had a nice game for this Vegas Raider team. We always knew he's a good receiving back out of the backfield and a special teams guy, but last week he showed some prowess in between the tackles. And Zamir White, Alexander Madison, we don't know if they're going to play in this game, but to be honest, if this Raider team wants to compete just a little bit, I think Amir Abdullah gives them a better chance out of those three running backs. But this week it's a tough matchup with Kansas City, but also could play into his hands where they're chasing points and have to throw, and he's that third down and receiving back, minimum 34 Travis Etienne of the Jacksonville Jaguars. It's been a bad year for Travis Etienne. Last season was a great year for him, no doubt about it. Coming into the year, he was a second, third round pick in fantasy drafts, and obviously he hasn't lived up to the bill, but this offense is banged up. Trevor Lawrence, though, I think he's going to give it a go. And this week it is a division matchup with the Texans coming to town. But I just believe Travis Etienne, the ceiling isn't high. Tank Bigsby, he's getting work as well in that backfield. And this week he's at the bottom part of the list. 35, Jaylen Warren of the Pittsburgh Steelers. I had good hopes coming into the year for Jaylen Warren that he was going to be a solid back and possibly overtake Najee Harris. So the first half of the year he was injured. He didn't play much. But now the last couple weeks he's worked his way in between the tackles. He had a goal line touchdown as well for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think he's a talented running back, no doubt about it, is Jaylen Warren. This week at Cincinnati, it's a great matchup, but like I said, his touches have been inconsistent all season long, and if this is a game where they're leading early and often is Pittsburgh, they're obviously going to run the football with Najee Harris for the most part. And the 36th and final running back on rankings, Javonte Williams of the Denver Broncos. I said this in other videos, the backfield's been a mess. Every week you have to predict who's going to be the leader in touches between Williams, Audric Estime, Jaleel McLaughlin. And I think Javonte Williams gives him the best chance right now in the backfield. He's only 24 years old. I know he's coming off an ACL injury a few seasons ago, but we saw a couple weeks he got a good workload and he put up numbers. And this week it's a decent matchup versus Cleveland, so maybe Williams could surprise once again. So that's a top 36 running backs I'm ranking for Week 13 of the fantasy football season.